Good evening, afternoon. It, with daylight, yeah, it's good 6:10. How about that? Good to see you. Glad you're here. I hope you've studied up this evening. No, not difficult. I want us to look for the next before Sundays in June, fifth Sunday, we have a church eat church, so we won't do it. But I want us to look at attitude, our attitude. War of 1812. War of 1812 was a battle that was fought on the North American continent. The War of 1812, there was a battle in Lake Erie. And in that battle in Lake Erie, Commodore Perry said, "We have seen the enemy, and they are ours." When you live life, sometimes that's the way you feel. You feel on top of the world. Christians should be and should feel victorious. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we feel defeated. Sometimes we feel like it's coming in and caving in on us. And instead of that great and wonderful feeling of victory, we often feel the agony of defeat. But could it be our attitude? We're going to look at different areas in our life in this month of June on Sunday nights about our attitude. And tonight I want us to look with regards to life circumstances. Our attitude towards life circumstances ought to be that we rejoice. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes we feel like, as we said, we've been defeated because we feel like everything's caving in. And it does seem like, doesn't it, that things happen in threes. That things, the car breaks down, dishwasher breaks down, and the stove just will not cook anymore. It just three things, just boom, 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 just all happens at once. It seems like. And it's very hard in certain situations, in certain cases, to rejoice. It's hard to find things sometimes in our life to just say, well, that's wonderful. I mean, the story, if you'd heard Jerry telling the story that he read in Reader's Digest this afternoon, I'll let him tell it after church. But, how could you rejoice in the middle of that? It'd be hard. And so life circumstances often throw such curves at us that it's just difficult to hit. It's just difficult to rejoice in. And yet the Bible says that we need to rejoice. Let's admit it. And let's just be honest. Life is tough. Life has problems, doesn't it? And those problems can be attributed to a lot of things. First of all, there's people involved. Actually, Shirley and I were walking down the aisle last Sunday morning right before Bible class, and I reminded her of the old preacher story. The man that got up one Sunday morning and he's saying, as his wife is trying to get him up and get him going and get him motivated and get him ready for church and get his clothes on. And he says, I don't want to go. Those people down there don't like me. Those people down there don't talk about, or they talk about me. Those people, they do these things to me and I just don't want to go. And she says, but you have to. You're the preacher. Well, now, it's an old preacher story. It's been told many times. But sometimes it's people that create the problems. People create the difficulties in our life. Life's just rough because people sometimes, those individuals that at times, if it hadn't been for people, they'd have been all right. Daniel is one that comes to mind almost immediately. But then there's not just people, but there's pain that comes. Pain associated with illness, pain associated with a broken limb. Visited late this afternoon, and she just broke, I think, her arm completely in two. I think friend of Linda's and visited with her for a few minutes at NHC. And I asked her, did you fight the floor or the wall? She said, a wall. Pain in life, pain that comes about. People, pain, possessions sometimes cause problems. Possessions from the standpoint of what we own. You might say, well, what we own, that's what we own. Yeah, but Do you like it when your car breaks down? Do you like it when the plumbing goes, appliances go kaput? No. They create problems in our life, don't they? And sometimes it's just problems themselves. You know, the neighbors don't always act right. Well, you can say, well, that's a people problem. Well, yeah, it is, but then it becomes a problem and we worry about it. I was going through some notes this week and I was reminded, I think I've told this story of a good sister. I used to go see her many years ago. I would go see her every Friday. And there was a reason for that. It's because she said, I want to see you every Friday. So I said, yes, ma'am. So I saw her every Friday afternoon. And so we visited, but yet she asked me one day, and she's pretty much bedridden by this point in time. She says, Brother Paul? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, I worry. And I said, well, you need to quit that. And she said, sometimes I worry that I don't have things to worry about, and I just keep worrying. So I said, well, just call me and talk. She had a husband, but husbands, how they are. And I said, well, just call me and we'll talk. And so every once in a while she'd call me. And then, when she got through, she said, I'll see you Friday. So yes, ma'am, I'll be there. But sometimes there are those problems in life that just create our difficulties in life, make it rough and make it tough. Well, we can admit it. Life's tough. Life has its problems. Life has its difficulties. And when those problems come, when those difficulties come, the Bible says rejoice. I don't want to rejoice. Sometimes you just want to sit down and cry. Sometimes you just want to sit down and wring your hands and say, oh, me. Nobody else is going to feel sorry for me, but let me have my own pity party for a while, and then let me get over it. I'll get over it. Let me get over it, and we'll be all right. The Bible says rejoice. I know we often think about good old Paul in Philippians chapter 4, where he says, rejoice. The Lord again, say rejoice. And yet he was in Roman imprisonment. And we think about the terribleness, if you will, if you'll let me use that word, of Roman imprisons. And when we think of how terrible it was, and yet Paul says rejoice, we think, man, how could he? How could I? Well, ultimately, we learn how, as we'll see in just a few minutes. But we have to know that there are times that come. Paul talked about in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, he says, I'd not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning the things that happened to me. How that we were hard pressed beyond measure, he talks about. He talked about in 2 Corinthians 11th chapter, he talks about all of the difficulties that he went through. The pain, the trials, the sufferings at the hands of men, at the hands of life itself. He knew he was equated with difficulties. And of course, we know his thorn of flesh in 2 Corinthians 12. And yet he said, rejoice. He told the church at Thessalonica, rejoice evermore in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 16. How do we go about that? How do we check our attitude? Well, maybe we should define attitude. Attitude is a state of mind or disposition. This is the way Webster defines it: a state of mind or disposition towards something or someone. And so ultimately we have to say, okay, what's my state of mind towards my life circumstances? Life's rough, yes. But what do I do about it? How do I find something to rejoice? I'm going to give you a simple answer and then a more, if you will, steps answer to it. So you got two answers and you can choose whichever one you want to put in your life. First of all, I think the reason to rejoice is because of God. One of the greatest reasons that we have to rejoice is because of the God that we believe in, the God that we trust, the God that we read about in the Bible, the God that has been revealed to us basically through nature itself, but also through his word. God teaches us to look to him. And I believe if we look to him, not to blame him, but to let him be as he is described in his own words, Father. a father to us, then he, being our Father, is able to, if you will, soothe the aches, to soothe the misunderstandings, to soothe the problems, to soothe the pain, to soothe the people problems. When we look at God, we find out a lot of different things. We find out, according to Jeremiah 23 and verse 23, God says, am I not a God at hand? The answer is yes, you are. We can look at that in a negative light. In Psalm 139, the psalmist makes the statement, where shall I go from your presence? And therein lies the question that it befuddles us all. Yeah, there's nowhere I can go that can hide or that I can hide. They're everywhere. While God has many great abilities, maybe the best ability that he has, and I don't know that you can really qualify God's abilities, but it might be the fact God's available. The availability of God is one of the greatest blessings that we have. To think that, first of all, in the midst of my problems, in the midst of my difficulties, in the midst of my heartache, in the midst of my hurts, in the midst of my questions, in the midst of my wants, what does he say? Jeremiah 33:3, call upon me and I'll answer. God says, I'm available. You know, we all try to be available. I try to make myself available to folks. You know, call me and I'll do what I can for you. We all do that. We tell people that all the time, and we honestly mean it. We know that folks a lot of times won't call us, but we literally mean it. You know, call me if you need me. Call me if you've got a question. Call me if something's going on that you want to talk. Call me. God says, call upon me and I'll answer. I think we rejoice because we understand God's available, his presence, but also his power. Well, there's nothing too difficult for God. God has great power. The children of Israel marched through the Jordan River, the book of Joshua. As they marched through, they gathered stones, and on the other side, they placed those stones as a monument. And the reason they did that is so that all the people of the earth may know the hand of God, may know the hand of the Lord, that he is mighty. All the people might look at those stones and ask, what means these stones? What's going on with this monument here? And the answer is that as they tell them the story, they'll be able to understand God is mighty. In Job 42, Job says, I know that you can do everything, and no purpose can be withheld from you. I know that you can do everything. You know, what can you do? Well, you know, there's only a few things I can do. There's only a few things you can do. We can't all do everything, but God can. When we come to difficulties in our life, we want to say, okay, we got to rejoice. Well, how can we rejoice? Well, we know that God has all power. Now, if he's made himself available to us to invoke what we need from him, then where do we go? We go to him. Why? Because he has the power to do it. We rejoice in God's presence. We rejoice in his power, but we rejoice in his protection. I love Psalm 121. That's the one, you probably know it well too. I will lift up my eyes to the hills. Comes my help. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. You remember what he says? He says, the sun shall not smite you by day, nor moon by night. Now, to us, that seems a little odd. We kind of get the idea of sun because we can understand heat strokes and things of that nature. But the moon, we don't understand. But you have to think about, in the time in which the psalmist wrote this, they believed in being not only sunstroke, but they also believed in being moonstruck. And they also believed that the moon could do things to you, could affect you. And I'm not so sure that the moon can't. It affects the tides of the ocean. And you, after all, and we're made up of more water than anything else. It might affect us. But they believed that they could be struck by the moon and it could change them. And so the psalmist telling the readers there, as he writes, the sun shall not strike you by day, nor moon by night. God's going to protect you. God's going to give you what you need, but he's going to protect you in those difficult times. And so we rejoice, but we rejoice in the fact that God preserves us. God's faithful, who will establish you, according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 3. God's faithful, who will establish you. God's faithful, who will establish you. You see, God is a God that preserves his children. He preserves them. Preserved Israel as they were wandering in the wilderness. The clothes did not wax old, according to the scriptures, even though they were there for 40 years. Did not want for food. God provided for them. He preserved them. And while he's able to preserve us, yea, even from all evil, we're reminded that God preserves us. You see, you look at this list, and we're not quite through yet, but you look at this list, and here's what you get. I believe I can make it. I believe that whatever my life circumstances are, I can make it. God is going to be there. God is going to wield his power to help get me through. God is going to protect me. God is going to preserve me. Now, let's stop right here for just a second. Let's stop and think about something. That does not mean, as we've already seen, that we are immune from problems and suffering and difficulties. No child of God has ever been immune from problems and suffering and difficulties because they were a child of God. It is, after all, the trials of our life that produce patience. It is, after all, the chastening of the Lord that is good for us, because afterwards it yields the peaceable fruits of righteousness. It is the difficulties that we go through that ultimately make us stronger and better. Let's make an application. When a child is to walk, they stumble and they fall. You know, their head is bigger than the rest of the body, and so balance is somewhat difficult. But they fall. They're beginning to learn. The one thing we all want to do as we watch our babies and our grandbabies begin to walk is to go over there and pick them up, right? No. The best thing for them to do is for them to get up themselves off and move on. Why? Well, they're building strength in their legs, in their knees, in their arms. They push up that which is needed in their life. When we go through all of these difficulties in life, we understand that God allows us to go through all of these, knowing that while it is trying our faith and testing our faith, ultimately, on the other side, if you will, we can come out with the perspective that we have, the view, the worldview almost, that, if you will, that we have of looking through God or at God through our lens. We see great faith. And so we ultimately have peace. A peace that Paul talked about that passes all understanding. A peace that comes from God. For he's the Father of peace. He's the God of all peace, the Father of peace, according to Romans 16, verse 20. Will crush Satan under feet shortly. The Father of peace, Paul wrote to the church at Thessalonica in 2 Thessalonians 3, verse 16. God's God of peace. You might say, well, you know, sometimes there just is not peace in the midst of my turmoils. In the midst of my heartaches and hurts, my problems, my people, my pain, my possessions, there just is no peace. There is if we lean upon God. Now, that's not to say, and I don't want you to walk away and say, oh, the preacher thinks I can't be concerned about my issues. Oh, no, you can be. That's why I tell you, call me. We can be concerned. And there is a tremendous difference between worry and concern. Worry is when it just overcomes us to the fact that we wake up in the morning thinking about it. We're thinking about it all day, and we go to sleep. Well, we try to go to sleep thinking about it, and it takes us a long time. An oversimplification, mind you, but that's worry. Concern is when we think about it, we try to make a plan to solve the issue, to solve the problem, and we put that plan into action. Can I be concerned? Sure. Do you think folks in the Bible were concerned about their issues? Yeah. I see Paul in his writings, and I see him really as concerned about his issues. He didn't mind sharing them with people, and he didn't say he wasn't going to get through them or that he didn't get through them. It's just the fact that he saw that there was a peace with God, that he could get through them. For I have learned in whatsoever state I am to be content. Paul says, I've learned. The word learned there is a word, it's the Greek word manthano. It just simply means to learn from a standpoint of experience. You know, we are students. We are all students. We should always be students. When we quit learning, we really began to die. But we're all students. We're students in school. We're students from textbooks, but we constantly learn. Experience is a great teacher. Now, that's the idea there. Paul says, through experience, I have learned that wherever I am, whatever I'm going through, I've learned to be content. I've learned to have that peace. Why? Well, I think if you go back and read his writings, read Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, and Galatians, and Ephesians, Philippians, especially those sections in almost every book that he writes about himself, he gets back to God, the presence of God, the power of God, the protection of God, the preservation of God, and ultimately, peace of God. And I think if we learn that lesson, we learn to rejoice, yea, even in the midst of our struggles and in the midst of life circumstances. Preacher, I need something that just is a little bit more practical. Well, I'm glad you said that. You came to the right place tonight. Because we ask ourselves, how do we have an attitude of rejoicing? How can we do that? First of all, look for the good. There's good to be found. And sometimes you have to. Andrew Carnegie, might have heard of him. Scottish industrialist. The end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s. Died in 1916, if I'm not mistaken. Now think about that time frame. At one time, had 43 men working for him that were millionaires. At that point in time, turn of the 20th century, 1900s. And you think, how in the world? And he was asked, how in the world do you have 43 men that are working under you that are millionaires? And he says, well, it's simple. He said, when I go to hire an individual, I plan on moving them up and paying them what they're worth and making them of value to me. But he says, I don't look for the dirt on them. I look for the good in them. It's sometimes hard to find the good in situations. It's sometimes difficult to say, you know, I see that and I see the good. You know, when you think about in Numbers 13 and Numbers 14, where the The spies went out into the land of Canaan, spied out the land of Canaan, and you have those 10 that came back and said, nope, we can't do it. But you find 2 that find good. Yeah, we can with the help of God. They looked for the good. They saw all the obstacles. They saw the same obstacles that the other 10 saw, but there was something within them. What was it? Well, they were looking for the good, and they realized God, His presence, His power, His preservation, His peace could get them through it. So, yeah, we can do it. But you also, while you think of them and you think of them looking for the good, I think of David and Goliath. You know, and we won't get into all the particulars of the story, but I want you to think about something. I want you to think about when David went out to fight Goliath, his brothers, no, be quiet. But then they put all this armor on him, and just a little boy couldn't stand up under that. And so with his slingshot and his stones, he went to fight Goliath. You might say, I think he was crazy. I think maybe he had a screw loose. Why would he go do that? Why would he? He looked for the good. He knew what? God. And he said, come in the name of God. And so ultimately, whatever the problem is, become the optimist that looks for the good, but secondly, focus on things for which to be thankful. Preacher, why in the world would we turn to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 20, where it says giving thanks always for all things? Why would we do that? Giving thanks always for all things to God the Father in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Why would we do that? In order to rejoice. Because I firmly believe that if you're looking for something to be thankful for, what are you looking for? Well, you're looking at the very first point. You're looking for that which is good. If you're looking for that which is good, you're going to find something for which to be thankful for. I cannot be thankful for the problems that I have. I cannot be thankful for the pain that I'm going through. I cannot be thankful for some of the people that are driving me nuts. I can't be thankful for them. Oh, yes, you can. If you develop that attitude of being thankful. You find something in their life in which to be thankful for. You find something in that problem for which to be thankful for. You learn something. You gain something. You see, it's important to be thankful. And when we begin to be thankful, who do we turn to? God. And when we turn to God, what are we doing? We're remembering His presence. We're remembering His power. We're remembering, you see, how it all works in a circle. It's to be one that rejoices. Focus on what to be. What is the good in this for which I can thank my Father for? Next, you want to learn to rejoice in life circumstances? Say something good. What do we usually do when life circumstances beat upon us? Poor me. Feel bad for me. I'm so mistreated in this world. While Isaiah reminds us to strengthen feeble knee. While we're to be individuals that encourage others, to exhort others. Hebrews 10, verse 24. Learn to say something good. Learn to say something good about your circumstances, but also learn to say something good about the circumstances of the other fellow that's going through a difficult time. Now, understand, they may not see the same thing you see. And once you tell them, they may reject what you say, or they may make fun of what you say, or they may even say, well, thank you, but that was not necessary. Or they may have to say, I need to think on that one. But we learn to rejoice if we learn to say something good, because why? We're looking back to the first one of this list. We're looking for the good. Don't look for the rotten tree. Don't look for the decay. What's the difference between the buzzard and the bee? The buzzard looks for the dead carcass. Right? And if you want to know if there's any dead carcass around here, just look up, because there's buzzards all around here. Right, Steve? Steve and I have talked about it. There's buzzards all around here. Bee looks for the flowers, the beauty, the sweet nectar, the pollen, of course, but drinks of those flowers. And so if you look for the good and focus on what's something good, learn to smile. Smile and the whole world what? Very good. Class. Smile and the whole world smiles with you. Smile is, we've learned it takes fewer muscles to smile than it does to frown. Well, I'm just going to try. But we have to learn to smile. It's sharpening us up. Problems in life sharpen us up. Talked to Jim Dillingham one time. This has been a long time ago. We were talking about something, I don't know. And I was talking about sharpening my hoe and my couple of hoes that I have and my shovels. And he said, Paul, have you ever heard of a grinder? I said, yeah, Jim, I have. But I like to do it by hand. Well, why, Paul? Because I don't have a grinder. Duh. But we had that conversation. And I do. I don't mind sharpening them. I sharpen them by hand. That old iron, that old file. It's that metal in that hoe or that shovel. And boy, sometimes it takes a lot to sharpen those tools, especially if I haven't sharpened them in a while. But sure enough, the problems of life. Learn to rejoice by smiling. You see, you're getting sharpened for that which is better. Understand what's ahead. How in the world can I rejoice when I understand what's ahead? Well, are you looking ahead? Are you looking at the outcome? Are you looking at what the possibilities are? Are you looking at where you're going? Are you looking in the rearview mirror of where you've been? Some days you are a bug on the windshield of life. But some days you're the ball that's flying out of the park that's been hit by the bat and you're a home run, causing the winning team to rejoice. Just life. But understand what's ahead and what's going to come out of this. You might say, preacher, I don't see staying in the hospital for a couple of weeks. I don't see that as coming out all right. And I don't understand what's ahead. Well, you're going to get better. I was with a lady this afternoon for just a very few minutes. But she is at NHC, and she is there for therapy. And so I was wheeling her back to her. She was new to us. As a matter of fact, she just came into NHC this week. And so I was wheeling her back, and I was talking with her. I said, well, how did you end up here? And so she told me. She's had medical setbacks. And she said, this last night, she said, I'd been falling some, and this last time I fell, my family said, no, you're going to the doctor. And she said, this is how I ended up here. And I said, yes, ma'am. But she understood what was ahead. She literally wanted to wheel herself down the hallway. I wouldn't let her do that. I wanted to push her and did. But she said, I need to build up my legs. I need to build up my arms so I can get out of here. But we also understand what's ahead from the standpoint of this world's not my home. I'm just passing through. Treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door. I can't live in this world anymore. There's better days ahead. But this is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. So, because of that, I look upon the face of God. What in the world, preacher, do you mean by looking upon the face of God? It's simply this. Trust in Him. Trust in God. Have faith in God. Believe that He'll take care of you. I'll call upon the name of the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. That's the psalmist says that in the very psalm where he begins, the Lord's my rock, my sword, my shield, my fortress. In Him will I trust. When we look upon the face of God, simply put, what I'm trying to say is just trust in God. Trust in Him with all your heart. Lean not upon your own understanding. Proverbs 3. Psalm 37. Psalmist there talks about don't fret because of evildoers. Notice what he says on several occasions through that psalm. Trust in the Lord. How do we get through life? How do we have that attitude of rejoicing even in the midst of struggles? By trusting in God, that He's going to get you through, that everything is going to be all right. Nehemiah chapter 8 and verse 10. I think it's just a fantastic verse, especially to go along with this subject. Nehemiah had gone back. We know the story. Nehemiah had gone back to Jerusalem to help rebuild the walls, or to lead the rebuilding of the walls. The children of Israel have finally come back, if you will. They've finally been led back through Ezra and through Nehemiah. They've been led back to home. They'd been away in Babylonian captivity, not where they wanted to be, surely, but they are now home. Nehemiah, remember the story. Nehemiah surveys the walls, surveys the situation. He then, if you will, in a town meeting, so to speak, gathers the people together and tells them what he's seeing and tells them what needs to be done. It's at that point in time that the folks rise up and say, let us rise up and build. And while they face insurmountable odds almost, people that threaten them, Sanballat, Tobiah, and others, they face the difficulty of time and they face the difficulty of supplies. They overcome in many ways, their laziness, because they had been sitting there for a while doing nothing, according to the prophets. And so they rebuild the walls. 52 days. They overcome tremendous obstacles in rebuilding the walls. Because these were not just little single walls. These were very broad walls. Matter of fact, I was listening to an archaeologist this week, and he talked about how wide the walls were. That they were thick enough, at least for possibly two chariots to drive on top of them side by side. And as you think about that, Nehemiah then, once he gets the walls rebuilt, he begins a revival. There are a few revivals in the Bible, and this is one of them. And part of the revival is the revival of their faith, the revival of worship. They hadn't been doing what they were supposed to do. And Nehemiah calls them together. He's reviving the worship. And he reminds them in verse 10, the 8th chapter, go your way, eat the fat, drink the sweet, send portions to those for whom nothing is prepared, for this day is holy to our Lord. Do not sorrow, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. Life circumstances. Now we're going to be talking about what's our attitude towards our duty in life, towards our duty towards God and towards others. That's the breakdown. That's the three lessons we have left. But in life, we learn to rejoice. Why? Because the joy of the Lord is our strength. This evening, the Lord's invitation is extended. If you need to respond to Him in faithful obedience to His will, won't you come? All together we stand and sing.